Hello and via live, welcome to the Disruptive Chef Entrepreneur Show. I'm Christian, your host, and today I have a really special guest. And I know I say it every episode, but this guy is amazing. And by the end of this podcast, you wish you had a guy like him. Let's get into it. Hello again. I'm Christian, the host of the Disruptive Chef Entrepreneur Show, and I have one of the most amazing guys I met over the last few months, and I've been actually after him for 6 months to come on the podcast. He always turns me down. I'm not sure if it's the accent or whatever, but he's from Canada. We won't hold this against him. But if there's one thing which describes him, and I quoted him, he is the Howard Stern of the food service industry. Let's everybody welcome Jay, Canada's restaurant guy. Jay, welcome to the Disruptive Chef Show.
It's an honor. First of all, I absolutely love what you do. You're incredible, and I'm just blown away to be here. So thank you for this opportunity. It really is. It's amazing.
So for our listeners, just give us the 5-minute cliff note. How did you become Canada's restaurant guy, and how did you become the Howard Stern of the food service industry?
Yeah, well, it's a great story. I've been in the industry now. It's my 34th year in the industry. I've been in the industry forever. I really, in a sense, helped a lot of restaurants over my career. I think we're probably working with 6,000 a year in the department that I built, and I did it for about 12 years and really just built up a pile of knowledge of how restaurants work and how to help them and coach them and consult with them and all that good stuff. And COVID hit as everything happens. Every story kind of starts nowadays with some sort of COVID to it. And I did that, and that came into my world, and we had to provide information out to a whole bunch of restaurants and people. And we said, let's try this podcast thing. What's this thing? It's kind of neat. I really didn't even listen to podcasts that much prior to that. And I did webinars and that kind of stuff, but never thought podcasting. So we said, let's try this podcast. Started in my garage. And 4 years later, through thousands of shows, literally, I think we're at 1,500 now, I think, is in 4 years. That's a lot of shows in 4 years.
It is.
And to do, because we did every kind of show there is. I've done golf food shows. I've done shows from my garage. I've done shows from Kiev over in Ukraine. I've done them all across the planet, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different people from all over. And I've had an incredible journey. So really from there, and then I think I don't know if it was Matt Rolfe or someone said, hey, you're Canada's restaurant guy. And that just kind of hanged on to that. And then we were on a show with you a month ago, and you mentioned the Howard Stern thing. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to enjoy that too, because that's a huge compliment. I'm a huge Howard Stern fan. And I love how he promotes musicians and he supports the industry. And I'm like, that's what I do, is I promote everyone. Out of the 1,500 shows, I have only done one show that someone interviewed me about who I am. The rest is all about everyone else. And I believe in that. That's something I stand firm on, that we don't talk about ourselves, we talk about everyone else.
And for me, like I said, I lived bi-curiously through your podcast to get to know you. And the reason I said you're the Howard Stern of the food service or restaurant industry is because what you just said, he always looked out for the underdog. He always promoted the underdog. He was always looked upon like he's an outsider because he did something before nobody else did it. And for me, every time I listened to some stuff, I was like, shit, he's like Howard Stern. And so for me, I think it's a very fitting label. And over the last few weeks, I got to know you, personally, all the amazing things you do, what your family does. So for me, I was really looking forward to this conversation because there's really 3 things I want to capture today. Number one is your journey on doing 1,500 podcasts. I'm about 100 in, and I'm not sure what else we can talk about, and I'm not sure who else to bring on. We had this list of top 100, and, we invited all the people. And then we started sharing some of my tips and insights. So for me, it became where a lot of our listeners come back and say, Christian, that's really great, but you're a cook. How did you get to do this? What do you do? And so I share I'm, analytical guy, my top 10, blah, 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 my top 5, how we go. And then, so that's what it evolved for us. And I want to start out the conversation, the struggles I had starting a podcast. I spent so much time setting up my setup because um, I didn't think it was what I wanted, and so for me, I found out there was an excuse. It doesn't have the back, Number
Yeah.
2 for me was I still don't like the way I look on camera. I still don't like the way I sound on camera, but I kind of start putting up with me. And then I have my create here, and by default, that became my thing. Actually, my daughter did this for me, and because I'm a huge believer that we create in conversation. The chair I'm sitting on, somebody thought, oh, we need to create chairs with wheels so you could put them in and out. And there's 5 people said, you're a fucking idiot. And there was one guy says, no, 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 that's fucking amazing. I can invest in that. And so everything starts in conversation and be creating conversation. So bring us back. How was your journey in podcasting and doing 1,500 of them?
You know what? Maybe I'll get you to help me write a book on this, because it is. I have learned through the hard way, and I have watched and listened to so many shows on how to do podcasts. Like today, you go to YouTube or you listen to podcasts about podcasts, and I think I've watched every one of them, because I've watched so much, in a sense, on how to even talk on a podcast, or how do you have a conversation on a podcast, or what does video podcasting versus non-video podcasting. So I really sat down and I really learned that there were some things that I wanted in the podcasting models that I believe in. I wanted it raw.
Mhm,
I didn't want to copy what radio did. And I found that, as we all know, radio is not in a good spot right now, because of the impurity that it has of being 100% authentic. It's edited commercials. You may get some of the live stuff, but it's still pretty safe in a sense. And they don't have general conversations. And some that do are maybe still good. I just didn't see that I didn't want to have, because I've done pre edited stuff before, and it just became so
mhm,
polished. It was so perfect. And COVID, I was like, you know what? COVID was really special in a way, because we were allowed to kind of lean into people's homes or
mhm,
businesses, or get to know who they truly were. And I always say, when people, if you got a kid or a cat, throw them in the background, because it always works to help improve the purity of who you are, or the authenticity that we're looking for. So there were some things like that. I wanted to make sure that we were live. I wanted to make sure that we had volume, because I knew I was fighting celebrities, or I was going against people that are a lot smarter than I am in the industry, or people that might have been doing it a few years longer than I had, and really didn't say, how are we going to make a dent into this
mhm,
space? And I'm like, well, it's got to be volume. Like, there's simple math equations, right? Either you're celebrity, you're really, really good, you're smart as can be. So I'm like, okay, we're none of that. How do we? Well, it's going to be volume. So we're going to come into people's houses, all, or homes, or phones, all the time. We're going to be in their face. And I'm a big believer, if you can get your brand into someone's home or on their phone, you win. So that was kind of the start of it. So we okay, going to be quantity. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not. In our first shows, if you went back to our first shows and really listened, you could probably hear the garbage truck backing up, or the Amazon person coming by going, I remember the one interrupted me. I was on a show, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm on a show." And like that kind of stuff. And it was the Amazon lady. And so by no means were we perfect. So we started there, and we just knew that we didn't even know what it was like. We didn't even know if this was going to be short term. We didn't know. All I knew is I had to, during COVID, I had to talk to as many people to inspire people to keep going, to inspire our industry, to give our industry, especially in the Canadian market, a common place to talk. So we had food vendors, food companies, people on there, restaurateurs. I talked to some of my favorite conversations were the people in the middle of nowhere that was talking and trying to provide advice to them on how to keep going or to let them know that the rest of the industry was hearing them and was hoping to help support them somehow. And we did one charity the first year. We raised a ton of cash to actually help them sustain themselves. And today we're still partners with them. And they said they wouldn't be around if it wasn't for what we did. And we didn't know what to do. We were doing commercials and selling commercials. We didn't even know what they were called or and all these things. So that was the journey. And then I got into producing some. So I produce, I think, about 6 other shows now that I do. And I love, I always say, I believe there's a couple things I believe in. I believe every restaurant needs one
Hmm.
and every person needs a podcast because in the world that we have today, and I go back to my parents, they always had coffee together on Saturday, like with people and friends on Saturday they called it the Co-op Cafe. At the Co-op Cafe, they had coffee together. And then I usually sat there and had French fries and ketchup, the crinkle French fries and the ketchup bottle, the plastic ketchup bottle
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Right. And I would sit there and listen to these long stories and these long conversations that we'd have, and they would be telling stories and they'd be funny and they'd be so good and they'd be laughing and everything else. So I'm like, my mind goes back to that moment as a kid going, that's all we got to do. Like that's all it is. But today we have to have some conversations through podcasting to have those similar conversations, which is fine. And some people have those outside of podcasts, which is fine as well. But I'm just taking those notes and
Mhm.
putting it into a format to hear the stories that we have from restaurateurs and chefs or from around the world.
I absolutely love that story. For me, I'm a big believer. I believe everybody who has a story to tell needs a book,
Yeah.
because a book is a great way
Yeah, I
not
know. Yeah.
just to push out your ideas, your content, your knowledge. It's also a great way to stay connected. And
Yeah.
for me, the more I'm doing podcasting, I actually say they need two things. They need a book so people can read about them, and then they need a
Yeah.
podcast to support.
100%. They do. It's the world we live in today. And if we don't have, it's our voice. And it was interesting because when you look at social media, when you go back to the beginning parts of social media, the early, the but probably 2000s and that kind of stuff, maybe a little earlier, is that we started using social as a communication tool of where we were, who's our family. Remember those first ones? We take
Mhm.
pictures of, yeah, we went here or we went there and look at us, look at my family. It was almost like those old Christmas cards that people wrote of their family, like they sent the cousins of how great their family was and all those things. We started using social media as a communication tool for so long, but then it kind of got corrupted in a way that people really lost a lot of trust within that channel to communicate. And today we still, people are still playing with it and stuff like this, but we do question the content that is produced through social channels. So we all question it, but I believe that podcasts are still pure. It's
Mhm.
still a pure communication channel. It's an intimate channel that we get to have 45 minutes or half an hour with someone to listen to them. And in the I always say, typically you don't have a group or a team listening to one podcast together. It's an intimate moment you're having with someone. And I'm a marketing geek. When you can look at what checks a box off in good marketing is to have an intimate moment with someone in the marketing space is gold.
Mhm.
It is one of the biggest things that we look for in the marketing is that we want that personal connection to that person through a marketing channel. Well, what's better than a podcast is you're listening to me for a long time to what I'm saying, and also you're trusting what I say because I'm the authority within that space.
Yeah.
So that's why I really like them. That's the journey that I've been on. I've had some ups and downs. Don't get me wrong. Like we've shot live from everywhere in the world. Um, we've had, you know, we had a podcast just the other day. We were doing one, and my computer for some reason just went funk and it died out. And then my co-host, which was in a different city, he kept talking. I was actually at a restaurant too, which is weird because I love doing them at restaurants. And he was talking, and we came back on, and he was still talking. And he said that I just told everyone you had a bathroom break. So I'm like, okay, well, let's keep it in there. It's kind of funny. We had a bathroom. Ever had a bathroom break on a podcast? There's no
Oh, that's
rules, right?
funny.
You have a 5 minute bathroom break, and then the co-host just keeps talking. So
I,
I love
yeah,
the no rules.
absolutely love that. And so for me, so you started out podcasting. What, because we all talk about this, what was your first equipment? What did you use? How did you figure out what you need to do? Give us a look back. Episode number one.
Yeah.
What,
Episode number one. I probably ran off of a Logitech camera that probably was 1080, if that. I think I had a Yeti mic, those round ones, the silver ones. I think I had a Yeti mic. No processor, no tech stuff. No light. I think I had like the old, like I think I stole my daughter's lighting from her photos, like photo booth stuff. Like honestly, Chris, if you saw it, it was in the garage. So we had like workshop lighting, like
yeah.
as if you're using to work in your house, or that stuff. We had those clamps, and then we had like these big white thing. Like it was just piecemeal together, and that's what we did. For we didn't know. And then you stole, like I think you said this once, that you've bought every mic I think there is. I've bought every mic there is, and I swear to God, like Amazon, oh, that looks like a good one. Or then you watch a video and the guy goes, oh, this is a dynamic mic, or this is not a dynamic mic, and this is what you're looking for. And all these different things. And you're like, oh, I don't know which one to get. And then you have to get the processor, and then, okay, well, what's this processor? And then, like it's like, what do you need here? Or what sounds do you need? Or what headphones? Oh God, you know how many headphones I went through? And those kind of things, until you find the one you go, okay, this works, and
Yeah.
this is effective. And I really believe about podcasting is you don't need nothing. You
Mhm.
need your phone and a good conversation. And
Yeah.
if you want to learn from someone that does this very well, is Gary V.
Yeah.
Gary will
Totally
do
agree.
a podcast off a stage with his phone and mic, and or non-mic or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that the part where we get stuck up on is people try to make it like a perfect or a polished radio show, or something so polished that it's preventing them on creating the content or the amount of content you need, because it's not going to be perfect.
Hmm.
That's okay. I think we're okay in society if I have to turn the volume up a little because it was low, or
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a bathroom break in the middle, or whatever the case is. We're okay with that as long as the story is good,
I,
right?
I love that. And therefore, our little slogan, progress over perfection. You know,
Exactly. And
and
that is like, first of all, you got to make sure with that too. Is that because that's what people do, is they prevent the amount of quantity. Exactly. They stop it because, like, my motto this year was imperfection is perfection, right? Is really what it is we don't we and I looked back, I like, okay, when did this all happen? I think we got polished because even when we do commercials or ad reads for our podcast, we like podcast commercials that are just buddies talking around this product and having a
mhm,
few laughs or whatever it is. This is true. You almost think it's the show. Well, what's interesting by that is that I think in the 40s, I think it was the 40s, maybe into the 50s, but the 40s and 30s and stuff like that, when TV was around, we had like Lucille Ball would do her show, and then she'd cut to a commercial, it wouldn't even cut to a commercial, she'd walk across the stage, start smoking a cigarette and talking about this new cigarette brand you need to buy. And she'd be like, okay, done. And then go back to her skit. I love the rawness of those commercials. I thought they were awesome. I loved how pure they were. And then through I believe through the 40s, after the war and stuff, into the 50s, we got into this notion that it needed to be more polished. We needed the
Mhm,
ideal, the ideal person to be in the commercial, the perfect woman, the perfect man, the perfect family, TV dinners, all these things came through that channel. And then we just started really ramping it up where it was, is that really fake food on the commercials and all these things? We just commercialized it to a point where, do you believe a bank's commercial today? No one does, right? So I thought when we were doing our stuff is I don't want to do that. I want to be the opposite where you look at, we'll see someone spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a commercial on TV, and we'll see Buddy that doesn't spend a nickel
mhm.
on TikTok, and we'll believe the TikTok guy over top of the commercial any day,
Totally
right?
agreed. And also, this is the disclaimer on the bottom. Jay said this is not a podcast.
Exactly. You notice, yeah, we do that on our show too. We don't, we want to make sure that we have some rules, and one of it, we don't do a podcast. We
So,
have a show.
so you did your first podcast,
Yeah,
raw clams. So for me, I we always laugh about it.
yeah,
We started my first one. I had this little corner in the dining room, and I needed the position just perfect because I was
yeah.
between two windows. If the shot wasn't tight enough, you could see at
I
night. You could
love
see the
it.
cars driving by, and um, and here we spend a fortune on different things. But the light I'm using is a $6 piece of light.
Yeah, yeah,
And my boom arm is a $15 boom arm, so
yeah,
it doesn't need to be fancy. So for me, my learning was doing it is better than not doing it.
yeah.
And
I would really, one of the things that I'm working on right now is I believe every restaurant needs one. The problem by that we have in saying that is that not every restaurant can actually do all these things, right? Like there is some things that you need to have, and
mhm,
you can do it off your phone. So ideally, what I want to create is a system or an app where you can just push it, put it on the table, and you can have a podcast created that way, and
mhm,
it allows you to bookend it whatever way. Like it kind of makes it as a simple push here and tell us about your story in a restaurant. So I can put it on the restaurant table, grab 2 cups of coffee, and have a podcast, and then I hit save, and then it loads. It does everything that we manually have to do in a way. It loads it up into the system, and boom, you got a podcast set. Ideally, I'd like to see that in the world where restaurateurs, chefs don't have to know the technical side,
mhm.
because and I think AI is going to help with that as well. But is that the technical side is the prevention now of everyone having a podcast? I don't think
Yep.
it's like the content is there, check mark, but it's the actual, okay, I have to have, a server site. I need to have, the system that loads the podcast. I need to join like Realstream or StreamYard or, all these different things. All those things prevent people from all having one. And I think we need to get to a point where anyone can do one by a click of an app or a click of a switch and
I
just
love
hit
that.
load. Right.
So
That's where I think we need to get to.
I totally love that. So talk to me a little bit about from your experience around podcasting. What are some unexpected ways in which a podcast can influence a restaurant or operation or a customer around engagement?
It's a great question. It's something that I think, so when you look at a restaurant, so if every restaurant has one,
Mhm,
the engage, so first of all, there's not, there's only a few restaurants that have one. So here, I'll walk you through the vision of what this looks like in my head. Okay, we spend thousands of dollars on marketing a restaurant, right? All the time on different things, maybe some old traditional ways,
mhm,
or maybe you're using social media, which is, whatever works. I think we have to look at what our funding is within that space and put it towards a podcast, and then just work that, because a podcast is also about a marathon. Podcasts are not, you're not going to be Joe Rogan overnight. You're not going
yep,
to get tons of views overnight. It is a long journey. It is a long, long journey. And you have to, and that's where 95% of podcasters don't make it past 3 shows, because they don't realize the commitment that you have to put in to get into that space, like into, and to make the wheels roll.
mhm,
Or you'll maybe do one season, do 8 shows and say, oh, I'm good. And then because you don't see the growth come from there. Guess what? You're going to have, I've seen where you'll get, 5 people listening to a show live, or you'll get this many downloads, or this one jumps up to 3,000 people listening to it live. Like, it's all over. But it's a problem is you have to create that consistency, and you constantly have to do it. It sounds easy, but that's more hard than actually the shows or producing the shows themselves. It's actually the commitment is the hardest part,
I
right?
I love that, and it's so true. And for me, I think so. We this is my third go at a podcast. The first one we did with a really good friend of mine who since passed. But for me, after he passed, I wasn't sure if I should do another podcast. It was Joe on
Mhm.
my podcast. Then we pivot into a more operational support one, and now um, I think what chefs really need is they need to have their thinking around their facilities
Yeah,
and their responsibility, and they need to be disrupted. So their thinking needs to be disrupted.
yeah,
Therefore, the disruptive chef. Because I honestly feel if we can bring to our audience people like you,
yeah,
and because I feel every chef needs to have a podcast right after
yeah,
they write a book, is I want them to think differently because all of the things we the guests we bring to them, if you take one or two things of what they're talking about, you could have a total
yeah.
different outcome in your operation. And so when you start that podcast, going back to the restaurant owner, so how can a restaurant owner leverage a podcast? Number one, to create a stronger community and maybe even customer loyalty around their brand.
Well, there's so many different ways you can look at this. So, first of all, as soon as you get a podcast within your restaurant and you get people to follow and subscribe to your podcast, you're now hooked into them, right? Like you're hooked into them. Your brand is now connected to them. So anytime you do
Mhm.
anything on your podcast, from releasing a show there's no rules. That's the cool part. There's no rules in the podcast world that says you can't do a 5-minute update talk
Mhm.
on your podcast. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes or an hour. It could
Yep.
be 5 minutes. Just, I want to do this little blurb on my podcast and do whatever it is. It's 5 minutes, boom. And then you produce it, you publish it, and it goes out. All of a sudden, thousands of people got on their phone, and boom, they're going to listen to you in this intimate setting. Like, you launch a new menu podcast, talk about the menu, talk about the processes, talk about
Love
the
that.
dishes, talk about where the food comes from, talk about what you're doing with the food. We have an interest in that space, but it is, in a sense, been kind of polished through TV. But when you look at us being able to hear actually what a real chef goes through when they're making a dish, it's actually incredible what they're going through and what the processes are. And they're all going to be different. That's the beauty. You might think of creating it this way, or I'm making this soup because my mom told me about this dress, or I saw it on TV and this is what I liked about it. All these things. Then you get into the business side of it. The more that you can humanize the brand, the more that we have a connection to those brands, right? So the more that we can have the owners getting on there and being the voice. We want humanized brands today. We want to humanize them.
Mhm.
So we want to put humans to them. We want to put the brands to them. The more that you can be that face of your brand or your restaurant, the more that we have a relationship to you. And I think you can do that by having the ownership talk about the struggles, the challenge. We like the rags to riches stories all the time.
Mhm.
So we can hear in typically most 99% of restaurants were rag to
I
riches. It was an easy. I don't
yeah.
think I've ever met a restaurant that said this is the easiest job in the world. No,
Listen,
it's all been a challenge, right?
I read a very interesting study today, and the interesting study was that 8 out of 10 restaurants failed because they were started by chefs. And they failed not because they didn't have great food, because chefs never learned what goes with it, which is the business piece, the marketing piece, the HR piece, the
Yeah.
construction piece, and everything else which goes with it. So now, if they have a podcast, what are some of the key elements to make a compelling and successful podcast, in your opinion, in our current digital landscape?
Um, Good question as well. Is Here's a rule. I'll give you this rule and then we'll walk into that. I always say to my guests, so when my guests get ready for a show or I do a thing on my show, usually you get an email saying, "What do I need to do to prepare?"
Mhm.
And I usually say, "Big pot of coffee." And they say, "What?" I said, "Yeah, there's no scripts.
Mhm.
Scripted podcast you can read through in a million different ways. It's so simple. So grab a pot of coffee and let's talk. And if you, I am having you on my show because I believe you're the expert in that field, and it's in your heart to be able to talk about it from your heart and
Mhm.
from what your knowledge base is. We don't need a script. I've done script stuff. You don't believe it. No one believes the script stuff.
And
Um,
we started too, and halfway I thought we needed to have, a script. It doesn't come across sincere.
it doesn't come across that way, right? And I know that people. I always say, and I used to teach this at a college too, is I believe in show rundowns. If that
Mhm.
makes you feel a little bit better, where
Yep.
it outlines what we're going to talk about. You may have some key points so you don't forget. That's perfectly fine. When you get 1,500 shows under your belt, you kind of do that automatically in your head. And then you may send it over to people. But I always say to them, you know what? Because our shows are live and they're at night, is I always say either, grab a drink, a glass of wine or a scotch, Monty, or a coffee, and let's sit down and have a conversation about who you are and what you do and what you do to the industry. And I haven't ran into a conversation that we haven't been able to keep talking
Yeah.
because there's so much to talk about. And there's so many things to learn about, and the people's stories. And the funny thing is too is you can, I don't know if you've noticed this, but you can actually navigate the story now. And
Mhm.
when you get good enough, you can actually start asking questions. Your question strategies become really strong, where you can start going, okay, well, let's talk about this. And then when you get like, let's talk about this, and this one, this question is going to lead me to this answer down
Mhm.
the road. And we're going to get there. We're
Yep.
going to get through this journey through them. So you can actually take their hand in the conversation and walk them with you in the direction you want them to tell their stories with you. And that becomes powerful as you go. Because a lot of, and chefs, they tend to tense up. You get a
Yep.
few drinks or you get them comfortable, then they just go and they just open up. So my goal within the first 5 minutes is I'm going to make you comfortable on the show.
Mhm.
And we laugh. And there's a key thing there too, is based on the algorithms that are out there and based on how we listen to podcast, laugh. Laugh is key. I said we wonder why they put laugh tracks in sitcoms in the 80s,
Yeah.
because those laughs release dopamine, and it makes us enjoy the show and we want more of it. So if you listen to my shows, we're usually, and it's by no means fake, they're usually intended because we create ourselves to laugh at each other.
Yeah.
It's a part of our thing. We laugh when we start our shows, and we do that for a reason.
Yeah, and I love, so I do my podcast by myself. You do yours with a partner, or some of them.
Yes, my co-host.
And I think it's almost easier if you have, because you kind of could play off each other if you have a co-host. So have you always had somebody with you, or
No,
is that something you started out from the beginning?
no, it's a great question. I never had a co-host for the first part.
Mhm.
I would bring other people in, but I was always by myself. And then I started doing a co-host with Dominic, my co-host, and it was awesome. It was just ability to have someone that can take that second away for you to process different ideas and different things you want to talk about, but also sometimes to lean the, like, take the commercial, or sorry, take the conversation to the direction that you may not know of. So they
Mhm.
kind of lead you down an area going, I never thought of that, right? Like I like that a lot. I love having a co-host. My co-host is my favorite. Like I we laugh so hard. He's flying right now because we have a show tonight, and I'm texting him going, like, dude, I'm going with withdrawals from my co-host. I need my, because we laugh so much, and our guests half the time are like, hey guys, it's about us, right? No, no, it's about me and Dominic cracking each other and making fun of each other. But there's not everyone's a co-host. Don't get me wrong. You have to
Agreed.
find the right
Agreed.
person. And that's okay. You go through this. I have other shows that I do with other people, and they're good. But I don't know if we have that
Mhm.
connection. But I started off single. I've done shows single. I've done panel shows. I've done food shows as a podcast model. Those were fun. I've done cooking challenges. I know I've done ugly burger contests. I've had I did a show which I saw someone might have taken my idea and running with it, which is fine. Um, is someone's I did foodies and cars. And
Yeah, I watched some of them. It's really
right,
funny.
we did foodies and cars where I actually came into the car through their stereo and did a podcast while they drove around with another chef, and then we talked about the cool stuff that they got to do and stuff like this. So it was a lot of fun.
I
Um,
love that because I have a friend of mine who happens to be in Canada, and he started out doing a podcast called Charged Up. And the podcast was, he says he has a Tesla, and every time he drives and charges up his Tesla, it takes him 45 minutes. He says somebody ought to do a podcast. And he started just walking around to other people with
yeah.
Teslas. And he says he had some really interesting conversations. And currently it's a TV show. And it's going to come out in the next few weeks. And the show is called Charged Up, where he
Oh,
drives
nice.
his Tesla with his partner to different charging stations and just strikes up conversations. And he said, I
I love that.
haven't not yet met a not interesting person around charging stations.
Yeah,
So he has the show
love
called
that.
Charged Up. I absolutely love everything about it. It's not scripted, it's not staged. It is what it is. And yeah,
Yeah,
so his co-host is wrong in so many directions, you know?
yeah,
And it's just a really good conversation. And it reminded me a lot of what you did with the foodies
yeah.
in the car.
Well, it was fun in foodies and cars. We did that, and Jeanette was so. Me and Jeanette was my. She was my co-host on that show. She was the chef driving the other chef
Correct. Yeah.
around, and we did some shows. She was so good at doing some of the shows prior to that. We are doing demos and stuff and talking about food. Then I said, "What if we got you in your car?" And well, we. So first of all, let me back up even further. We did a show. This is funny. We did a show in during the pandemic with all these chefs. So we had like I think there was about 7 of them. And at the time, COVID was still around, but I think it was over in California, they were figuring out how to reinvent eating in a car. And they were doing these long, they look like almost like a table, but they put it from one end of the window to the other. And there's these long boards, and they would have like candles on them, and it looked like a dining table for your car. And people were serving people this way. And I went, oh, that's cool. So I said, well, what if I do a show and all these chefs cook from their cars? And they said, and everyone's like, what? I said, well, yeah, I think we can do it. I think it's possible. So I call these chefs and they're like, okay, Jay, right? We're like, what are you on? So we did it. And we had chefs. So we had, I think I remember James, he was on the edge of the 401 in Toronto with another chef. And all you could hear is the whoom, 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 cars flying by him while he's cooking on the side of the road. He did like a cooking out of the car on the side of the road. Well, the busiest highways in North America. So he's doing one there. We had another company in the back of their F-150 truck that they had umbrellas and everything out of the back of the truck. And then we had one bakery company. She was in the back alley with her SUV open. She was cooking from the back of hers. We had, I'll never forget, we had, his name is Jeffrey. He was in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're sitting there and he's in his garage and he can't have the car on because of the sound or something. And he keeps messaging me. He's like, dude, it's getting warm in here. It's getting warmer. And he goes, I don't know if my meal is looking that much good. Like, look, what I've created is starting to get a little wilty. And you can see during the show, the sweat is starting to come down because he's in like he's cooking himself, right? And then we had one lady, Jeanette was, then Jeanette gets on the show and she has like, I'm not kidding you, she starts pulling out stuff. And this is where it got the idea going from is she has a crock pot and she's like, let me show you. So she's actually cooking in her car. And then she's got a charcuterie board that's a 2x4 or something from one end of her car to the other, but it goes in between the seats.
Yeah.
And then she's putting all the food on this, and then her kid gets in the back seat, and he's eating from this charcuterie board, and she's cooking from her car. She's got crock pots here, crock pots there in her car while she's sitting there. And I'm just like, this is genius. This is awesome. So then that we finished that show, and then we could never redo that again. It was a special show. So then we did another. We then I said, let's do this in cars. So let's do foodies in cars. I said, Jeanette, you rocked it. Let's do it again. So we did this. We did a series with her. She picked up chefs from all over Toronto. We picked them up, got them in the car, and then they didn't know, but they were walking into that they had to actually create a dish now while they drove around with her, as well as be asked all these questions through a podcast system. So Jeanette would set up all these different items and stuff in her car. So when you got in there, you didn't know. But then as you started driving, we would cut and we'd be like, okay, this is the time where we get you to create a dish with the products that are in the car. And they're like, okay, what? Yeah. So then I'm not kidding. She starts she put her arm behind the seats. All of a sudden she pulled out like a frying pan. And then food would be coming out of like the back, or and then the glove department would be, it was the black box. The glove department was the black box. So we didn't know what was in there, but that was the main ingredient that you had to make something out of. And then she'd the middle console and stuff, the console there with all this stuff, she'd be pulling food out of there. So they'd have to create a meal while I drove and asked them questions about food and being a chef. And they were laughing half the time, going, I had
Oh,
no
it's
idea.
too
I had to
much.
create a food item. And then they would create it and we would show it up on the camera. So we did a series of those.
And
I liked it because you can only talk so much
yeah.
about stuff, right? Like
So
sometimes it's great to have those.
I love all of that. But then I was on your late night show. Talk to me
Yes.
about the late night show.
Yeah. So there's another great one of those ideas, eh? Well, that was me and Dominic were doing some shows with his podcast that we produced for his company. And we were doing some late. I said, you know what do you do at 9:30? Like it's 7:30 my time, 9:30 Toronto time. What do people do at 9:30? They're usually, like chefs or restaurateurs or people in general. Well, they're not doing much. Like, what do you do minus 30 degrees? Or, for you guys, it's really cold up here. And what do you do? Well, let's interview people, because it's during the time when we used to do shows. There's always like, oh, I'm sorry, man, I'm working. Well, 9:30, not two people are working, and they're usually getting ready for bed. So we would be like, okay, what do you want to do? Show? No problem getting guests at 9:30. So that was easy, check mark. And then I'm a huge fan of late night TV. I always love, Stephen Colbert, Fallon and Jimmy. And I love what those guys are doing. And I've always been a huge, like, the other ones too that were before that always was, the late night shows, from the old guys, right? And even the daytime shows I loved. I always loved the interview process. So we took the late night idea and I said, let's be the first late night restaurant show, and we'll take some notes from those guys. And we got some cool stuff coming up for it as well. And let's do late night shows. Let's do a late night show, and let's do it as not as a podcast. We'll joke about that. We do now have it as a podcast because people were asking where can they listen to it. And we do a video podcast for Spotify. But we started off, really just having some fun and trying to give people a voice, and to not, like, if and the odd day we do miss because I need a break or whatever it is. But yeah, we do Monday to Friday, 5 days a week, and we do it at night, and then we take it and then we upload that into our podcast network. And yeah, we have a lot of, and trust me, we laugh 99% of the time, and we try to get the seriousness out, and we try to, but we're laughing so much.
And
And
I was on it, and eventually our conversation went 3 hours.
it did. We just keep, and it's funny because Dominic, we've got like me and him. Holy cow, we'll just keep going back and forth and back and forth, and he helps. Like it's just perfect in a sense. Talking about what we do in the guests and things. But we've got some cool stuff. We're going to look at integrating, a 15-minute cooking part into it.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually we're working with some companies right now. They're going to do some cooking into it. So bring a chef in and do a 15-minute where me and Dominic will still be there, but we'll have a cooking segment, just like the Tonight shows, inside our show. So there'll be a cooking part. So we're going to layer that in. Sounds difficult? Absolutely. It does. That's why we haven't done it quite yet. We're figuring out some of the logistics and things like this. But I want to put a cooking part into it. And we've done everything. We've tried AI. That was a lot of fun where we get AI to tell us the ideas for the night. That was good, but it was got a little awkward when there was AI was still giving us the same answers from every guest. So I was like, well, there goes that. Wow. So we got rid of that. And I think what now is that we just get in there, we have a great conversation, we laugh our asses off. We have a drink or two if we need to. Dominic showed up the other night with a couple too many pops in his belly. I thought he was going to fall asleep on me, and and we have a lot of fun. And the guests have been. It's funny, when you hit a certain degree, and this is to anyone that starts podcast, you have to ask all the time, "Would you like to be on the show?" I still do today, but I notice now a lot of people ask to come on the show. And I love that. I love because that means that we're obviously getting out there and people are curious about
I
getting
I
on.
I love what you do, and I love what you do for the industry, and that's why I still stand by that you're the Howard Stern of the industry. And looking from that Howard Stern of the restaurant industry point of view, what do you think? What role does podcasting play in the future of the restaurant storytelling and brand building?
You know what? I think when you look, we're going to need it more than anything as AI comes into the world.
Hmm.
We're going to start questioning what they say, like 90% of content next year will be created by AI. I think you'll have a divide between this, because today you already have it, like Instagram and those kind of things have already indicated, is this AI generated or is this real generated, right? And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
you're going to
yeah.
have that divide. We know podcasts today can be created by AI very easily.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
even in,
yeah,
in our side around the book writing, if you self-publish, you have to disclose if there was at any way or any form you used
yeah,
AI, and they can check on. So I
yeah,
think even on the book section, you will see books written by AI
yeah.
category.
And I don't have a problem with that. Because I'm a believer. If I think I might have said it on the show that you're on, is that AI is not going to replace humans. Humans with AI will.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you need to use it as a tool and a resource. And I
Agreed.
think Gary said it the other day was you need to use AI like you were used that you got to start understanding how to use email. You
Mm-hmm.
have to learn how to use AI the same way because it is such a part of our world. And if you look at, and I watched the Killer Robots on Netflix the other night about AI integrated into the army. If you see the sophistication of where AI is within that space, you
It's
don't
coming.
think it's going to be in our industry and doing what we do. You're crazy. It is coming and it's going to reinvent our industry. It may even make it where we can survive in our industry. Um, and I think when you look at podcasting and from a restaurant standpoint, we need you guys to tell the stories. We need that content. We're desperately in need of
I
good content.
So I think my view on this is very similar. I think there's more stuff coming out of
Yeah,
AI, but I honestly believe how currently people leveraging AI to
yeah,
be ahead of the curve. I think in 2 to 3 years, raw this kind of
yeah,
conversation, honest conversation coming from experience, not from
yeah,
AI generated
yeah,
content.
yeah,
I think is gonna supersede that because
yeah.
people want to
100%.
know, you know, and even in the industry, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur today. But I think in 10 years, being a plumber is the guy who makes a $500,000 a year,
Yeah,
or being a good electrician, you can make a $500,000 a year. So
100%.
I think that all will come back. We just had some minor stuff done here at the office, and as we paid the bill, I wanted to be an an electrician. I
I
didn't
know.
want to remortgage the house in order to pay for a little bit of work, but he made it look easy.
Yeah,
And not only that, because we expanding next door. So
yeah,
I didn't want to blow a fuse. So that was really the thing. I came to him and says, listen, I want to fit in 2 more people back there, but I
yeah.
can't blow a fuse. It's just piece of cake. You have enough doing on the panel. You have 100 amp. We do what we need to do. And I said it was almost cheaper buying a new building than paying him for a little bit of work. But I think that honestly will come back.
Yeah,
And I, for me, one of the things, and there's a few things, I want to quick tell the audience. And the reason I fell in love with you because it's real. One of the things we do here, we don't script, um, we don't edit. We just did a show with one of our celebrity chef friends. Her son came in the background. He cooked and he made some noise. It is what it is. My dog barks. The lawn guy comes here. It is what it is, because I wanted to be real. And the second thing I wanted to do is, the moment we run out of content to say, we stop it, because I want the people listening to this know the reason we're doing this and the reason we share and give advice is because we went through it. I don't want to teach or share anything which I didn't go through myself, because then it's not real. And for me, being the disruptive chef is my sharing my struggles and helping people to shorten their learning curve so they don't need to make the same mistakes I did. Because when I and I want to ask you this question in a little bit, because if I would start over, the first thing I would do is I find somebody like me and say, hey, how did you get to where you are? Because rather than for me taking 3-5 years to learn it, he can learn it to me in an afternoon or in a weekend. I think that's the number one thing I would do. The second thing is I would figure out who I really am. And because I want this to come across because as we started out, I thought we need to talk like every other podcast guy,
Yeah,
we can't use the shit word or anything else,
yeah,
and this is how we talk. Sometimes stuff is shit, and then my wife always said, it's kind of educational, but it's not you. And now we're at a point where I feel this is us. And, and it
yeah,
took me 150 shows to do that.
yeah.
So,
And I think that's normal. Is that's that whole process of
mhm,
going through and allowing yourself to reflect and what's working and stuff like this. But that's the biggest thing that I tell people is just be yourself.
yeah.
Like just literally be yourself.
Listen, it's hard because,
It is. It
you
is.
know,
It's easier said than done, right? Like
correct.
that's easy.
Because for me, it was the same with a book. The reason I want everybody to write a book, because a book exposes you who you are.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah. I
me,
look at a book and that's one of the hardest things. It's almost like seeing someone change their engine or work on an engine on a vehicle.
and
Blown away. Blown
yeah,
away.
and I feel the same way about podcasting, because the more I started listening to other people, the less I wanted to do it myself, because I was like, I can't do that. I sound
Wow.
funny. I don't have that. So for me, that's what I absolutely love about you, and that's why we fell in love with you, and that's why we want to support you. And I'm a little selfish. You're the Canada's restaurant guy. I want you to be US's restaurant guy,
We'll work
and
on that next. We'll work
we
on
will
that.
help you to do that, because we need a little bit more Jay. So let's wrap this up for our listeners. If anybody is on the market, and there's nobody better than you, if anybody is on the market to start a podcast, what are the 3 do's and what are the 3 don'ts you want them to do if they start a podcast?
3 do's is first of all, do it. Just do it. Don't overcomplicate it.
Mm,
So we'll do okay, there's do it, don't do is overcomplicated.
mhm,
Don't worry about making it perfect. Just do it. That's the biggest thing. And give yourself time to make mistakes. That's
mm,
the 3 things that I would recommend everyone do. Screw up a ton of times. Celebrate those. And listen to yourself on your phone with earbuds in or headphones on and listen to it. And then celebrate people that are going to listen to your show and be proud of it and hear yourself because other
mhm,
people are going to listen to you in their cars or at work or at the
mhm,
gym. Embrace that moment because it's incredible. I always say it really hits home when you hear yourself talk on a car in this model. It's awesome. And that's what I would say do. But don't get hung up on the name. Don't get hung up on the format. Don't get hung up on okay, we need a strategy and a plan for this. Just flip and do it. And that's the best advice.
I love that. So, a question we ask every guest: if you wouldn't be a podcaster, what would you be?
Oh God. Dentist.
Why?
You never thought I was gonna say that, eh? Because I went to school the same amount of
No,
time they did.
I thought the reason you wanted to be the Howard Stern of the restaurant industry, because you wanted to show everybody what your sous chef can do with a 10-inch kibasi. So I'm not sure where the dentist came in.
The dentist. Because I went to school the same amount. I always said I went to university the same amount of time as a dentist, and my paycheck in a dentist is completely different. And I seen what they do. And so I was at the dentist on Halloween. The dentist goes, man, he goes says to his assistant, and they had like a Halloween show on the TV, and I'm under there, and he goes, man, I love Halloween. And I looked at him and went, no shit. Right. So I don't know. I would have been an artist if I wasn't doing what I do. But the fact that I get to do this plus help restaurants and coach restaurants every day and help support the industry, there's not much more, I think, because not many people know this, but there's a personal relationship to the industry to me of the food service world. It was my place that I felt safe in a
Mhm.
house, being raised in a house that there was a lot of verbal abuse, and it was really a rough place to grow up into. And by Saturdays and Friday nights and Saturdays was always in a restaurant as I was a kid, and there was no fighting in those
Yeah.
places. So I go into a restaurant today, I literally will go into any restaurant, and it's weird because it's physically, I will physically feel safe. Isn't that weird? I'm not kidding you. I'll go into anyone, and I can sit in a restaurant. You think I can sit on these things long? I can sit in a restaurant for hours and hours and hours because it's my safe place. So
Mhm.
I personally have to return the favor of the industry because you made me feel safe as a
It's
kid.
amazing.
Right. So that's my tie. When you talk about your tie into the industry, I'm not a chef. I cook well, but I'm not a chef. I've ran restaurants, but I couldn't figure out until Matt Rolfe and myself sat down going, why do you like this industry? And then I had to sit back and we had to peel it apart, and we realized
Yeah.
it's my place that I feel safe.
It's amazing. And for me, my reason I'm in the industry is my grandma, who was really my mom. My mom passed away as I was 7. My grandma raised me, and my grandma always said 2 things to me. Food has the ability to bring people together like nothing else. There's nothing else which can bring people together like food.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, she always instilled in us, food is a great equalizer. When
Yeah.
people come together to share a meal, no background, no color, no anger, nothing means anything because we're here to celebrate
Yeah.
food. And, she was 104. She passed, an amazing woman. And for me, I think a lot about that because she's absolutely right. And for me, I went into the culinary industry because my parents made me.
Yeah.
You know my story.
Yeah.
And now when I look back, it was the best thing happened to me.
Wow.
Um, and it certainly
Oh,
happened for me because it allowed me to do all the stuff I do, and it allowed me to meet people like you. And it's amazing. And for me, I'm so amazed about what you do with podcasting because you make it look easy. And I wore my special shirt for you because I was afraid when I do a podcast,
I love it.
I didn't want my brain to give me my silent treatment. Um, and
I
it
love
was
it, man.
hard. And listening to you, you make it look so easy. And,
Oh
and I
man.
think it is because I honestly believe you, not just Canada's restaurant guy, you're the Howard Stern of the food service industry. So with that, I want to say thank you for being here today.
No.
But before we let you go,
Okay.
we want to make sure that our listeners, please, if you want to join our private club, join the Disruptive Chef Club, which is our private community where you get a front row seat of all things we do. From new programming, from new guests, you get to see it first before anybody else. And that is also our group we're using as a benchmark and as our group of advisors to make our programs better. So if you haven't done so, please join the Disruptive Chef Club. We have monthly giveaways. We just gave away an iPad a few weeks ago. Come and become part of the community. So, but before we let you go, Jay, we ask all of our guests 3 rapid fire questions,
Okay.
and
Okay.
we need you to answer them honestly. And I'm curious to hear
I'm
what
not
you
gonna say dentist.
have. That's messed up. Truth be told, he had no clue this is coming. None of our guests know.
Okay.
And 3 simple questions which gonna expose who you are. And
Okay.
so question number 1 is, if you were given the power to get rid of one ingredient forever, what would it be and why?
Cilantro.
There's a whole culture built on that. You got people pissed off about that.
Yeah.
And
You know
why?
what? I was the guy that you know what? I just had too much of it on a pizza once. That and pomegranate. Can't stand them.
There's a lot of people very upset right now. Question number 2, if given the power to make one cuisine go away or one cooking style away, what would that be and why?
Oh, that's a loaded question. One cuisine, one cooking style.
Yeah.
Boiled hot dogs.
Now I'm mad at you because I love boiled. There's no other way to get the crunch.
I
You gotta boil
know.
it.
I don't know. I not that I don't like it. I wish it would go away because it's so
That,
good.
that was a little hurtful. I took that personal. And the last question is, what is a kitchen gadget which is way overrated?
Oh, a gadget that is overrated in the kitchen. Steamer.
I steam 40% of my meals. I'm so offended
Come
right
on,
now.
man.
I
It's
I will
oh.
unfollow you on
Every chef just went click. You
uh
know, like
conversation
what?
over. Um,
Over honestly, well, that there's a lot of things that are a little overrated, but
Uh,
come on,
and
steamer.
listen, we had some really good questions from mandolin to garlic breast to people's attitudes, chefs' egos. I mean, it was just it's crazy. Well, we heard it all so far. Some of them pretty hurtful. Some of them were funny, but
The
majority of them very
steamer.
hurtful to a whole generation of people. Um, but Jay, I really appreciate you coming on
Oh,
our show. We appreciate the gift of your time. Thanks for sharing so freely of your experience of being a podcast. And I couldn't agree with you more. This is not a podcast. And if anybody wants to start a podcast, you guys need to check in with Jay. If you have a product and you need somebody to help you bring it to market, you need to reach out to Jay. If you have something you want the world to know, please reach out to Jay. He can help you to give your ideas, your equipment, your thoughts. He can make it and give it voice. So, Jay, thanks for being here today. Tell our listeners how can they get a hold of you.
the best place is I like hanging out under Canada's Restaurant Guy. Um, on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. That's my home base, I guess. Or you can find me on Instagram under Canada's Restaurant Guy, TikTok, all those places out there. But or you can just Google me because I think you can just Google me now after doing so many shows and stuff. And please, you'll probably see some old shows there as
Mhm.
well. But yeah, just you know what, I'm game on people reaching out all the time. I absolutely
Awesome.
love it, and I respond to everything. I
He,
really
he he
do.
does. I tried to respond the other day in German, but LinkedIn corrected, so I couldn't do it in German. Uh, it actually
I
does
do
correct it.
respond. I
So
do respond.
yeah, it was a little hurtful. I had some really good ones going, but it didn't work. But I have to say, you've been amazing to work with. I know my team loves you. We listen to you about what you're up to all the time. And we follow you on all of your platforms. And also to our listener, if you haven't done so, follow us, The Disruptive Chef. We are on LinkedIn, Facebook, we are on TikTok, we also now on YouTube. And let us know what you would like to hear about so we can bring some really cool, new, interesting guests to you. So by then, if you haven't done so, make sure you get to the disruptivechef.club, join our private community. We have a celebrity chef come here. She's coming over in May 10th, and we're gonna give away 10 signed books of her new book. She's absolutely amazing. You guys need to check her out. So, with that, I want to say thank you, Jay, for being here today, and to our listeners. Until next time, remember to disrupt your kitchen, fire up your career, stay hungry for change. I'm Christian, your disruptive chef, entrepreneur, host. I'm signing off. I had enough. Jay for one night. Be the change, be the challenge, and be the chef who sets the world on fire. And make sure stay hungry and stay disruptive.